Well, hello and welcome to Top Med Talk. Here at Anesthesiology 2023, it's the annual meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. I'm your host, Desiree Chappell, and I'm joined by my co-host, former editor-in-chief of Top Med Talk, Monty Mythen. Good morning, Monty.
Desiree, it's great to be back in the chair.
It is. We've missed you a little bit. I know you've been busy with other duties over the course of the last couple of days.
It's been a strange few days. You know, I did an interview early on with you, but then I handed over the editor-in-chief, you know, having founded Top Med Talk, and you joined me shortly afterwards, to Professor Mike Grocott. And I'm now experiencing a new thing. As opposed to FOMO, you know, the fear of missing out, I've got ammo, which is actually missing out. So I wander past every now and again and think,
I know.
But anyway, I'm back in the chair.
You are back in the chair, that's right. Well, if you're not familiar with Top Med Talk is a perioperative medicine podcast. We're global. We're listened to in over 100 countries around the world. We have over 2,000 podcasts and over 2 million downloads. So very busy.
So I actually got some texts this morning from around the world about stepping down as editor-in-chief.
Oh, so
they were remarkably polite.
Well, thank you for listening wherever you are in the world. We also wanted to say thank you to the American Society of Anesthesiologists for providing this beautiful space here within the exhibit hall. We couldn't have done this without you, so thank you so much. And thank you to all of our sponsors, Edwards Life Sciences, GE Healthcare, and Medtronic. You help us keep the lights on. You help us keep going and keep Top Med Talk and all this wonderful medical education free and open to everyone. So thank you so much. So we've had some amazing conversations over this weekend, and this morning is going to be no different. This is the one we've been the most excited about, and what we always are excited about here at Top Med Talk every year at Anesthesiology is our chats with the outgoing and incoming presidents of the ASA. So joining us today is Dr. Champeau and Dr. Ronald Harder. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely a pleasure being here again.
All right, you're back in the hot seat again, Dr. Champeau.
Indeed I am.
That's right. Well, for our listeners, everyone out there watching today, tell us a little bit more about your background and then your presidency incoming this year.
Well, my background, actually I began my career in medicine as a pediatrician, but after completing my training in pediatrics, I saw the light and then trained subsequently in anesthesiology. And I've had the privilege of working mostly at Stanford University over the last 40 years, doing a mixture of pediatric and adult anesthesia.
Yeah, so we're in your hometown here for a little
Very close to it, yeah. I live just maybe 20 miles down the peninsula.
Yeah, that's right. And Dr. Harder, we'll come back to you in just a little bit. Well, why don't you tell us about your background?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm what you would call a lifer of ASA. My involvement with ASA dates back to when I was a resident. I did my residency training at Georgetown, and I was one of the officers of the Resident Component Governing Council 30-some years ago. And so since that time, that gave me early recognition of what a wonderful organization ASA is. And so I've had the opportunity to serve in various roles, serving on committees, House of Delegates, chairing committees, board of directors, and now I've been, this will be starting my 12th year as an officer for ASA. So really just can't say enough good things about what a great organization ASA is.
Yeah, dedication for sure from both of you. Well, Dr. Champeau, I just want to say congratulations on a fantastic year this past year as president.
Oh, it's been one of the most rewarding and interesting years of my life.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm certainly will enjoy having a little less hectic pace, but it has been for someone when you're starting to get closer to the end of your career than the beginning, it's great to still have new stimulating things to do.
Yeah,
and so it's been a wonderful experience.
I'm sure. Well, it has been a big year for you, and we're going to talk about some of the opportunities, challenges, but also the wins that we've had and that you've had throughout the year. I first wanted to talk to you about some big changes that have happened over the course of your presidency in this last year. Lots of change in leadership. So Paul Pomerantz, who's been the CEO of the ASA for the last 10 years, is stepping down and going on to do new things. But I'm sure that was a big I guess, news
Change.
for you and change, yeah.
Well, certainly. Now, he hasn't formally stepped down yet. The transition will occur at the beginning of 2024. And it didn't come as a complete surprise to us. We knew that he would be nearing the end of his contract with us, and he was at a point in his life, and we were at a point where we knew we were going to need to conduct a search for his successor. We never want to say a replacement for Paul because nobody can probably replace him. So pretty early during my term, we started working on the search. And a crucial part of that is identifying the right people for the search committee, and of course then the right corporate advisor for the search committee as well, the right search firm. We're fortunate. Mary Dale Peterson, who was our president back during the COVID period, as a tremendous all-around administrator, anesthesiologist, intensivist, really led us through the toughest times in the society with great confidence and aplomb. We tapped her to be the chair of our search committee. In putting the committee together, it was probably a little bit large compared to some search committees, but what I was really looking for was broad diversity. And not just in terms of the traditional gender or racial or ethnic diversity, but diversity in terms of practice style, academics versus private practitioners, diversity in terms of geography. We wanted representation from around the country. And in fact, we had such good diversity, we heard that one of the candidates said that they really hoped that they would get the job just because any organization that would put together such a diverse search committee had to really have its priorities correctly aligned. So we put the committee together. We originally had 160 applicants, narrowed that down in stages, and ended up selecting our current COO, Brian Riley, to be Paul's successor. And Brian is held in the highest esteem imaginable by the staff. They're thrilled about his selection, and we're really looking forward to this. This is one of the decisions that made during my term that will shape the next decade for the society. So we're feeling quite confident that we handled that as well as we could have.
Good, great.
Well, congratulations on that, and we look forward to working closely with Brian in the future. I just want to say personally a very big shout out to Paul. He's been an amazing global ambassador for the ASA. You know, you see him pop up around the world. He's always got a smile on his face. He's always got a smart thing to say. We miss him already.
Well, and I've learned, again, I mean, I haven't been in positions of leadership like Paul for my entire career, the decades that he has, but you can really learn from people. And of course, we all recognize his people skills are just phenomenal. And that was an obvious, but there were other subtle things. Like there were times when I kind of, would ask him, well, how do you deal with it when you get bad news or something goes against you? And he talked about his philosophy and that there's just nothing is gained by dwelling on that. You need to, always be looking towards the positive, the future, the better things to come. And that was helpful to me.
We've also had some transition in leadership within the journal, correct?
No, and I think this again represents a real opportunity for us. Evan Karish really did a fabulous job as our editor for a long time. Expanded as he, I think, used the phrase the reach and the richness of the material. But it was time to make a change. And again, we put together an extremely diverse search committee, representation from, again, the entire breadth of the academic field that we felt in our country. We had people representing different subspecialties, but again, different demographic groups. Again, a large committee. I think we had about 15 people on the search committee, which is large by those standards. But again, I think that ultimately served us very well. We didn't have, of course, 160 applicants because the number of people out there who could do a job like that is far more limited. But again, we retained a firm that specializes in assisting searches for editors of academic journals. I think we started off with I don't know, maybe 10, 12 really strong candidates. By the time we got it down to 4 or 5, we felt that any one of those that we ended up with was going to be a great fit for us. Yeah. Where we've identified the successor, I guess I won't mention the name right now.
No official announcement yet, right?
Just because it still needs to be approved by our board of directors. Now that I don't expect there to be any kind of an issue with that, but until the board formally approves that, and that will happen on Wednesday. Yeah. And at that point, it will be a done deal.
Yeah.
Well, big thanks to Evan as well, because he was very generous to us with his time and also overseas with evidence-based perioperative medicine and the forums we had amongst the editors-in-chief, so big shout out to Evan too.
No, that's right. Evan was a wonderful ambassador for the journal overseas. I would see him, sometimes when we were out at international meetings. He was always there talking to authors. Obviously, we want to pull in authors from not just the United States, but all over the world. A lot of the best science is being done elsewhere. And so we need that presence in the international space to continue to draw the best articles. Yeah. And we certainly intend to do that with our new editor.
Well, Dr. Champeau, here on Top Med Talk over the weekend, we've been talking about some of the challenges that, policies and legislation that we've had to face over the last, years. But this year, can you talk about some of the key legislation and policy that you really saw that really has affected anesthesiologists?
Well, on the positive side, the work done at the state level, which is where most defense of patient safety, defense of physician-led care. Most of that is going on at the state level. And we had a terrifically successful year this year. Our state affairs team, working with our component societies around the country, we were able to defeat attempts to inappropriately expand the scope of practice for advanced practice nurses in 18 states and really didn't suffer any what we would call setbacks. We also defeated this APRN compact legislation, which is sort of an attempt to expand scopes in multiple states simultaneously. That was defeated in all 7 states where it came up. So at the state level, we had a very successful year. The federal level, there were really 2 issues where that came to bear. One was that back during the early days of the pandemic, the administration, as part of their response to the COVID pandemic, waived many existing Medicare rules and regulations. And one of those is the federal requirement for supervision of nurse anesthetists. Interestingly, that made every state essentially an opt-out state during that time. It was interesting to us that as far as we could learn, no state, no institution, no hospital actually took advantage of that. No one changed their staffing in terms of who was actually caring for the patients. But that waiver was still floating out there, and we wanted to make sure that waiver ended with the public health emergency and that the underlying requirement for physician supervision of nurse anesthetists resumed. And I had conversations with attorneys at Health and Human Services, with administrators at Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and even with the White House Domestic Policy Council, urging them to allow the waiver to expire and the underlying requirement to come back into effect. And that happened in May with the expiration of the public health emergency. So that was a complete success from our side. The other place where we're still working on that is within the Veterans Administration. For many years now, really almost a decade, there has been a push within the nursing administration of the VA to allow independent practice of advanced nurse practitioners. And way back in 2014, they made an attempt to do that. And in fact, the Veterans Administration at that time, looking at the issue, granted independent practice to 3 of the 4 classes of advanced practicing nurses, clinical nurse specialists, nurse practitioners, and certified nurse midwives. At that time, they did not grant independent practice to the nurse anesthetists. The nursing administration has brought that issue back again, trying once more to grant independent practice to the nurse anesthetists. We've been working on that at multiple levels. We've met with the top officials in the VA. We have had several meetings with influential influential legislators who have important financial or oversight roles over the Veterans Administration. We've had legislation introduced in both houses of Congress, bipartisan legislature, so there's no skew to it. I'm trying to block that independent practice, and we've worked particularly with two of the veteran service organizations, and notably the American Legion and the the Vietnam veterans, to make sure that their voice, we know that their members feel that they want physicians leading their anesthesia care, and we're trying to make sure that that voice is heard.
Yeah, Monty.
Can I pick up on that language about physicians leading their anesthesia care? The reason I say that, you might be up to speed with what's happening in the UK, where I'm from and practiced for most of my career, where we've had a pretty much almost entirely physician-delivered anesthesia practice, which is not unusual in some parts of the world, for a long time until relatively recently. Now we're just transitioning into the Royal College of Anaesthetists, training, educating, licensing, whichever way you want to phrase it, alternative providers to help grow the team, because we have a very clear manpower shortage in the future. The reason I raise that is, as people make their very appropriate cases to try and make patients safe, the language sometimes gets a little bit ugly. So we start to talk about victories and defeats and protecting patients. And I can imagine some of the young physician anesthesia people that we're trying, non-physician anesthesia providers we're trying to recruit, listening to this and saying, well, I don't want to be in something where I'm being defeated and I'm not safe for patients. How do we balance that language out? Because it's a team game.
No, absolutely correct. And it's, I think it's very interesting. I agree with you. I think worldwide there is going to be a shortage of anesthesia practitioners. Given the years of training required for a physician specialist, whether we call them an anesthesiologist here or an anesthetist there, we are going to need to leverage that expertise with some non-physician practitioners. I think the question, though, is how you go about doing that. There are places around the world where the relationship between the physicians who are leading the team and the anesthetists who are working with them are excellent. I've worked in other countries, Vietnam is one in particular, where the relationship there between the anesthesiologist and the anesthetist completely harmonious. Everyone agrees on what the duties and responsibilities of each role are. The problem we have here in the United States is the push for completely independent practice by the nurse anesthetist, and that's the crux of the disagreement. I think here in the United States we have an interesting laboratory, if you will, for the introduction of non-physician practitioners. We have two groups of non-physician practitioners here. We have the nurse anesthetist, which is numerically a much larger group, and then we have certified anesthesiologist assistants, CAAs. The CAA profession has grown up from the anesthesiologist community. We were intimately involved in the creation of the field. We're still involved in their education, their certification, and their raison d'etre is to work in that team with us. There is no agenda for independent practice, and that model works beautifully. The nurse anesthetist, now we know that a lot of nurse anesthetists out in their day in, day out jobs work harmoniously for the good of the patients with the anesthesiologist. But there is certainly at the organizational level and in some departments, there's a fair amount of acrimony related to that oversight role that the anesthesiologists have.
And it's that word acrimony.
Acrimony,
I'm sure that some people listening, patients, for example, would think, hang on a second, you people aren't really in there fighting about who gets to look after you. And that's not how it plays out, is it?
Yeah.
No, that's why I say at the individual hospital, when people are actually taking care of patients.
The day-to-day, it's
not
we work
that.
together as
but
a
it's
team.
at the organizational level.
Yes.
Yeah.
We in the ASA put a lot of time, energy, and frankly dollars into advocating our side of this issue. The American Association of Nurse used to be anesthetists. Now they've changed their name to Nurse Anesthesiology. They do the same. And so there is, at the organizational level, each side, of course, is putting up their message. And much as we see in our national politics, those aren't looking for the common ground.
Yeah.
Just a last comment on this, because we should move on to some other items.
Yeah.
There's been a move in the last few years in the UK in particular where perioperative medicine has really grown up a lot. For many physicians now to refer themselves as perioperative physicians, to distinguish themselves not in a judgmental way, in other words, they've got a more holistic practice from their colleagues who are specialist anesthesiologists, for example. I don't know if that language is creeping in at all.
Well, we, as an organization, we feel very strongly that perioperative medicine is a very important part of the future. And of course, we just came an hour ago from our Robenstein lecture where Dr. Sessler, who I've known for over 40 years, gave a very compelling presentation of why anesthesiology needs to embrace postoperative care more fully. I think when we look at perioperative medicine, all of us understand that we have gotten the intraoperative part to a point where it's remarkably safe. The advances of the last 30, 40 years have improved the safety of the intraoperative care dramatically. I think in the last 10, 15 years, we've made big improvements in preoperative optimization, preparing people, getting them in the best shape possible for their surgery. So we've made great progress on that. The postoperative piece is missing. That's where the mortality is. Postoperative mortality is strikingly high still for hospital inpatients. There's a lot of good to be done there, and I think that Dan's message this morning was spot on in terms of an area that needs our attention and one in which we can demonstrate the value. We have a new center that we've developed.
That's what I was just going to say. Hasn't there been a new center developed for that?
There has been.
Yeah.
We've been working on this for years, and just organically within the organization for many years we had a perioperative surgical home steering committee. We identified that concept of the perioperative surgical home, which was different words, but the same concept of looking at the entire perioperative period from the decision to operate until recovery. But we had that group working. Then we also had a committee on perioperative medicine, which was focused more on identifying what the curriculum might be for a fellowship in postoperative medicine. We realized we needed to kind of pull all of these people together, and so this year we created a new Center for Perioperative Medicine led by Maxime Cannison from UCLA now, but of course internationally known, extraordinarily well connected throughout the world, and a recognized expert in perioperative medicine. So I was thrilled that he agreed to take this on for us, pulling together the existing work done by T.J. Gann and Rob Shekar with our other things. So we're really trying to make a real concerted push in that area.
One of the other centers, too, that you guys have developed or worked on was the Center for Anesthesia and Perioperative Economics, correct?
That's right. That, too, was an attempt to pull together some resources that were organizationally scattered around our organization to try and pull that together in one area, sort of elevate the profile of the work we're doing there. I think in the long run, we're probably looking at bringing some additional fairly high-level expertise in terms of healthcare economy, policy experts into that. We're not at that point quite yet. But initially, we're just trying to organize to make it the most efficient for people working in that space in our organization to interact and synergize with one another.
So those are launching this year. I also know that there's some ad hoc committees that you worked on this last year. Can you tell us more about those?
There are. One of the few privileges, really, in terms of being the president, in terms of where you can just do something, is to appoint ad hoc committees. And one I appointed this year was originally called the Anesthesiologist Bill of Rights. This was an idea that came in. We thought that sounded a little too entitled, and so I think the name has now changed for Fundamentals of a Safe and Healthy Workplace for anesthesiologists, I think. But the idea was to pull together a group of people to identify what expectations anesthesiologists can rightfully have of a workplace environment in terms of the resources that they have available to take care of the patients, in terms of their own personal safety, protection from radiation, things like that.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of a broad range of things. And it's drawing from statements that we already had within the organization, but we identified gaps where we don't have a statement, but we felt there was something that needs to be addressed, and then that will be taken forward next year. Yeah. So that was one. Another ad hoc that I was actually directed by the House of Representatives, or House of Delegates, excuse me. Yeah, House of Representatives. Well, similar models, similar models based on representation and size of the state. But the House of Delegates last year, specifically the Committee on Academic Anesthesiology, directed us to form an ad hoc committee on, originally they said harassment, or harassment, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And we identified Della Lynn, who's out in Hawaii, but who's done a lot of work on patient safety and the effects of incivility in the operating room on patient safety. Very important. So she was the ideal person to put this together, and we have representation from many different committees within the organization. We've expanded it to, it's now called the Ad Hoc Committee on Harassment, Incivility, and Disrespect. And they've prepared their initial document, wanting this year to get some feedback. We'll continue. Dr. Harder's going to, I don't want to speak for him here, but I know his plan is to continue that committee and give them another year to sort of polish that up. But we think it's very important.
I saw a video earlier this week. I think it was a clip at the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation meeting that Dan Cole was chairing, which was very, very good about, look at yourself and your practices at work and the things you say and the things you do. Is that part of the endeavor?
Well, not directly, but Della Lynn, who is heading that up, she is a very outspoken, very highly respected member of the APSF board and has worked on that issue with them, which is part of the reason she came to our attention. We work on a lot of things with them to one extent or another.
Yeah.
It was really good. So keep, if you see that pop up in different places, have a good look at it.
Keep
it's really
an eye
good
out for that. Yeah.
No, I think Della and this committee, they will be the world's experts on this topic.
Yeah, Dr. Champeau, you've had a very busy year. there's a lot of the things we can talk about, but I wanted to bring Dr. Harder in and tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're looking forward to as you are incoming and expanding the work that Dr. Champeau and others have done over the last year.
Well, thank you. Yes, as you can glean from the list that Dr. Champeau has gone through, there is a very full plate already starting into the year. So certainly,
you're going to be busy.
I will be busy keeping those initiatives going forward. Certainly, the centers, both perioperative medicine and on economics, those are both critically important and really important to the future. Both current and future state for our specialty. And those are really, they're out of the starting gate, but they're not very far out of the starting gate, I would say. So I think helping to assure that those are moving forward in a positive direction, and that they have the resource and support that they need in order to succeed. I have full confidence in the people that are leading both of those centers and are in the leadership team of those centers, that we have absolutely the right people there. But there's a lot of work to be done there. And many of the ad hocs, including the ones that we've discussed, I plan to continue those. In addition to all of those things, and recognizing that the crystal ball is never perfectly clear, and that there may be issues that we're not even on our radar currently that we'll have to address throughout the year. Certainly the national standards of practice within the VA, that is on a course where there will be some recommendations that will come forward undoubtedly at some point in this governance year. And we've already been very active and with engagement, as Dr. Champeau had mentioned, with some leading veteran service organizations in addressing those issues. But there will be a good bit of further activity on that in the year to come. I had the privilege just within the last few weeks to testify before the health subcommittee of the Committee on Veterans Affairs in the House of Representatives. Not even
The real House of
not even the
Representatives,
House of
yes.
Delegates this time, and just to provide testimony supporting maintaining the current physician-led anesthesia care model for our veterans. And I think this is the type of thing that the more light we can shine on it, the more that veterans and citizens will be supportive of this, because on its face, to suggest that our veterans who have no challenge with access to care, to anesthesia care within the VA system, that somehow there's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, that requires that nurse anesthetists provide care independently for some of our, certainly they're all heroes, but certainly among the more complex patients that require anesthesia care. I think it's not just a AA&A versus ASA issue. It is a much broader issue that I really think the more that our public knows about that, the more they will side with our veterans in assuring that they continue to receive the highest quality of care.
Now, one of the questions I wanted to ask you too, you've been really involved in developing the workforce strategy, correct, for the ASA. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Certainly. Yeah, and certainly Dr. Champeau as well. It really, and gets credit for helping to form the initial workforce summit that met about 15 months ago, I guess, June of 22. And at that first workforce summit, we convened a broad array of stakeholders. So anesthesiologists from academic practice, private practices, small, medium, large groups, healthcare executives, representatives of the American Board of Anesthesiology, of the ACGME Residency Review Committee for Anesthesiology, and really did a very thoughtful review of what are the current challenges with our workforce supply and demand, and then what are some potential work streams to come from that we can develop potential resources and solutions for various aspects of that. So out of that initial workforce summit, we developed really 4 working groups, 2 on the supply of anesthesia professionals, 2 on the demand for anesthesia professionals, and all of those groups have been very engaged over this past year. Anyone who would like to see a snapshot of those initial efforts in the November 22 ASA monitor, Mary Dale Peterson, who leads pretty much anything that's important within ASA. She's
still very active after her presentation.
She leads our workforce efforts as well, and so she and some of the various work group leaders provided great detail in that monitor edition about those issues. So to sort of reassess where we are in those efforts, and to identify what are the further next steps that we need to do. We have another workforce summit convened for late November, or early December, and so many of the same stakeholders, but some even further, I would say, expansion of some of the important stakeholders. We'll have representatives from the American College of Surgeons, American Hospital Association, for example, that I think will further give us as much as possible, a really global view of the workforce issues that we're facing. And there's, the bad news is there's not a quick, easy fix that will suddenly be right-sized with our staffing. But that being said, there's a number of initiatives that I think ASA can help to facilitate, and certainly just providing resources and education for our members for addressing various facets of that.
Yeah.
And for those young clinicians in the broadest sense who are listening, who are considering a career in the perioperative space, it's still one of the, if not the most exciting parts of medicine, I would say.
Absolutely. And at least in the United States, our medical students are voting with their feet that they very much view anesthesiology as a very attractive and desirable specialty. I have been mostly in academic anesthesiology for the 30 years of my career, and in various roles, including program director for residency and then department chairman. So I've been very involved with recruitment of medical students into the specialty for a very long time, and I have never in my life seen the way that it has become so competitive as it has over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So that's the of the storm clouds overhead facing our workforce issues, the very bright silver lining is absolutely that there are so many just terrific medical students seeking a career in anesthesiology.
Yeah, just
Yeah. Well, I had a conversation a couple nights ago with a medical student who was here at our meeting, and he comes from Indiana University, and I happen
Go
to
Hoosiers.
Yeah,
That's where I'm from.
I grew up in Indiana.
Oh,
I didn't go to school there, but for years it's been the largest medical school in the country because it's the only medical school in the state, and so
Indiana,
it has a need to create a lot of physicians for the population. But he told me that a third of the graduating class wanted to go into anesthesiology. Now,
Wow.
the school was looking to try and redirect some of their interest
Sure.
elsewhere because a third was high. But I was shocked when I heard that.
Yeah.
And relative to historically in the realm of 5, 6, 7% of American medical student graduates would pursue careers in anesthesiology. So it is it is definitely a lot of excitement around it.
Yeah.
And with the perioperative space, I know I keep banging on about it. From that moment of contemplation to full recovery, you can bring your physicianly skills to bear across the whole spectrum. So.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to bang on the same drum, but Dan Sessler this morning, his message was that the field of anesthesiology needed to create a fourth major subspecialty, post-operative care along with pain, intensive care, traditional operating room. Yeah. So it's great to. You obviously were prescient as well in identifying this as a real opportunity for the specialty.
Yeah, for sure. Gentlemen, great conversation. Thank you so much. I think we've heard a lot of what's happened in 2023 and what to expect in 24. I know we could continue to go on because there's still a lot of initiatives we didn't even get to cover. Dr. Champeau, as you are leaving your presidency, what are some of the things that you're really most proud of and actually some of your fondest memories over this last year?
In terms of what I'm most proud of, I mean, I do think that we made progress on our usual advocacy agenda. Obviously we did very well at the state level this year, but we held our own on that. But I wouldn't say that's where my biggest accomplishments would have lied. I think that, again, laying the foundation for the future, the new editor, new CEO, the work we've done establishing the centers that we referred to earlier, continuing work on our committee on market-based strategy, which Dr. Harder has chaired. So I think we've done a lot of things where we've sort of poured the metaphorical concrete, laying the foundation for the future. So that's I think, probably where I feel like I've accomplished something. We also put a lot of effort into trying to change the culture of our board meetings. We have an extraordinarily large board of directors. No organization would design itself with 65-member board, but trying to make their meetings more interactive, more deliberatively. We had fallen into a habit of talking at them with PowerPoint presentations. So we really made a lot of progress on trying to get them more engaged, more conversation, more deliberative. So that's all good. My fondest memories, being out on the road, talking to our members at our meetings around the country is absolutely number one. The thing that I got to do this year that I haven't done in the past is also represent the society internationally. And probably one of the best experiences for me was a meeting I just came back from, the Chinese Society of Anesthesiology in Changsha, China. As it turns out, my wife is of Chinese ancestry. My son speaks passable Mandarin. So they came along with me. My son did some translating for us. But I was really treated as an honored guest of the Chinese Society while I was there. I gave several lectures, visited hospitals. It was really an absolutely wonderful experience.
Yeah, that's great. And Dr. Harder, what are you most excited about for this year?
Well, certainly it's, first I want to just acknowledge what a terrific president Dr. Champeau has been this past year, and we are greatly in his debt, and his impact on ASA will be felt for years to come. So can't say enough positive about the job
Very kind of you.
that Michael has done. But in the year ahead, it's just a tremendous honor to be able to lead such an amazing organization as the American Society of Anesthesiology. So in spite of all the challenges, there's tremendous opportunity, and we have, in my remarks to the House of Delegates a couple of days ago, I just remarked on the tremendous wealth of talent and commitment of so many individuals, both our physician members as well as our staff, and to have the opportunity to help to guide and lead that group is just phenomenal. As far as any specific agenda that I've got in the year ahead, in addition to the 100 or so balls that I'll be trying to, to juggle and keep in the air, I've always had, not always, but for the last several years, had a particular interest in wellness for our members. We have a very robust Committee on Physician Wellbeing that does a terrific job. They've provided a lot of great resource for our members and do a lot of great work. And I think I've been in some conversations over the last several months that I think we have an opportunity in the year ahead to provide really some additional, very robust resources for our members and even for our members' family members with respect to various wellness resources. So I'm hopeful that will come to fruition because it's a growing challenge, and it's certainly fueled by the workforce challenges, but there's a lot of pressures coming to bear on our members, and to the extent that ASA can provide some resource to help our members to navigate that, I think would be a tremendous benefit to our members.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Champeau, I just want to add congratulations for your term. Thank you very much for being a wonderful partner, not only to the other anesthesia colleges, organizations, perioperative medicine around the world, but also to TopMed Talk, the very generous partnership here that allows us to sustain free open access medical education. So thank you for all of that. And Dr. Harter, good luck.
Thank you. I need it.
So say your words of advice for Dr. Harter in closing.
Well, he's a very experienced leader. He's chaired a university department for over a decade, which is one of the most difficult jobs imaginable in anesthesia. So he, I think, comes into this extraordinarily well prepared, far better than someone like myself who's practiced in a smaller environment or just been a member of a university department. I guess I would just to say to try to enjoy some of the unique opportunities that are afforded. Some of the representing the society as a guest of some of the international societies when I've gone abroad. That's been great fun. And I made this point, and you made it as well. Both of us owe a huge debt to our spouses for the additional burdens that they've shouldered over these decades that we've been off doing things. And one of the real benefits of the presidency is that your spouse gets to accompany you on most of these opportunities. And of course, one morning when I was running off to give a lecture, and my wife was packing because we had to dash off, and she said to me, she goes, you really couldn't do this without me. And I said, no, I believe me, I realize 100%. That. But enjoy that time with the spouse. It's a very special experience.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Michael Champeau, Dr. Ronald Harter, thank you so much. Congratulations on the last year and the year incoming. You're going to do fabulous. It's going to be wonderful. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us here on TopMed Talk. You can find more conversations from last year and previous meetings at topmedtalk.com, and all of our wonderful content that we've recorded here, where we talked a lot about some of the subject matter that we discussed today. So please do check that out. We're on X, formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. We're there. Your favorite podcatcher, we're there as well. If you see any of our YouTube videos, give those a big thumbs up. That helps us as well. Thanks so much again to the ASA. We could not do this without you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, hello and welcome back to Top Med Talk here at Anesthesiology 2023. It's the annual meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, former co-editor-in-chief, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Desiree, as always, it's wonderful to be here.
It is. I'm having a hard time saying former co-editor-in-chief.
Well, at least I handed over to a wonderful person.
You did.
Yeah,
Yes.
Professor Mike Grocott.
That's right. Congratulations to Mike Grocott, who had to leave us. He was here for a couple days and flying as my wingman, and that was a lot of fun. Filling your chair over there and doing a great job. But
Filling less of it, but he's a fit guy.
oh, yeah, come on. Monty, it's been a great 3 days here at Anesthesiology, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, wonderful. Very exciting meeting.
Yeah.
As always, not unusual. As I say, we don't have to say now how wonderful it is to be back in person, but we must remind ourselves that we spent a few years not being able to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know,
And Monty, it was 5 years ago this weekend that we were here doing Top Med Talk, really for one of our first big shows.
yeah, the first time that we had our own space
Yeah.
as a studio with Smith's Medical, as they were at the time, and, onwards and upwards.
Yeah, that's
Look at
right.
this, we've got almost half the trade exhibition now.
I know, it does feel like it. We could not do this, honestly, without the support of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. They have given us this beautiful booth, this space, and the support to be here. So thank you so much to the ASA.
And our sponsors, so both myself and one other guest who you'll introduce, or he'll introduce himself in a moment, now work for Edwards Life Sciences. So they've been a long-term supporter.
Yeah, well, our founding supporter.
Founding supporter, which is one of the reasons I stepped down as editor-in-chief, because although I'm still lucky to be associated with Top Med Talk, it would be inappropriate with that potential conflict to be the editor-in-chief, because we do run it like a journal,
We do.
like a peer-reviewed journal.
Yep.
And even though I think I would have the ability to manage that potential conflict, it's deemed inappropriate. So there we go.
Plus, it's a lot of work. So
There is that bit too, but I wasn't going to
So two
go on
jobs.
about that. Yeah.
That's right. Wonderful conversations over the last several days here at the ASA meeting. And this one is definitely no different. We have the opportunity to chat with some older friends, Thomas Sheeran, who is now with Edwards Life Sciences. But Thomas, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
So I used to work as an anesthetist, a cardiac anesthetist, for the last 30 years. Before I joined Edwards last year as their medical affairs leader in Europe, in the EMEACLA region, how we call it, which was an exciting change in my career. And,
Yeah, big change.
yes, it was.
Lots of fun, though, I'm sure.
It is, but also lots of work. that I didn't expect. I didn't see that coming.
It's having made transition. It is a lot. There's a lot of false perceptions, aren't there?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So if
But you miss the on-call at nights, the weekends.
yes, very much. So,
Yes,
very much.
you cry over those. a lot.
But as I said, under the bottom, I work more than I did in my previous life. So, but it's fun. It's positive energy.
What do you miss?
I miss the practical things. So sometimes I visit a lot of ORs now. People, other key opinion leaders in their OR, and sometimes I feel some itchy hands when they.
They're gas. I got to turn that down.
Give me the echo. I show you. But of course, this would be inappropriate to do so.
Yes.
So these are the moments I miss my job, but overall, it's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's it. Thomas, the last time we caught up was actually this past summer at the ESAIC, the European Society of Anesthesiology and Intensive Care. And that was a fantastic meeting.
It was.
As well. And we had some great conversations. You can find those at topmedtalk.com if you want to hear more. That particular organization, we've been at that meeting, Monty, for several years and have been able to talk to leadership. But we are so excited to be talking to the incoming president of the ESAIC, thank you. I said the full title earlier. Wolfgang Bohr. It is so wonderful to have you, Wolfgang. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, all of you, I have to say.
All of us. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, and where you've been practicing, which do you?
Yeah, my career is quite parallel to that of Thomas, because we are both for approximately 30 years cardiac anesthetist. He's a bit older than me. And momentarily, I'm heading a department in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I'm the first professor of perioperative medicine and anesthesia there.
Really?
Because we make it a bit bigger, the department, and also our responsibilities. And starting from 1st of January, I will be had the beauty to be the president of the European Society.
Yeah, congratulations.
My pleasure, thank you.
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of things that you have been working on will continue. Can you tell us? Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the organization as a whole? Because I think they've gone through some transition in the last several years.
For sure. I think basically in the meantime, the ASA has developed to an organization with 5 primary interests. The first and foremost is education. The second is scientific communication, including this wonderful congress we had in Glasgow, including all the programs we developed throughout COVID, like the webinars, the podcasts, etc. The third one is the examination, which is quite unique, because the ESAIC examination, anesthesia and intensive care, is one well-respected examination throughout the world. Then we have the advocacy, so we try to be the voice of all European anesthesiologists. I think these areas are the core of the society. And together with Monty, with Thomas and a couple of others, we are relatively long active in running research to figure out what are the challenges in research in perioperative medicine throughout Europe. And this network has resulted in a couple of valuable publications, a couple of valuable research groups, and that's something we are definitely proud of.
Yeah, lots of collaboration.
Very collaborative.
Yeah.
It's one of the keys with the European society. Not that there aren't other societies that are very collaborative, but extremely successful on that front.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you know, one of the things we've kind of having sideline conversations about, and definitely a hot topic here at the meeting this year, is artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence, which is a word that we kind of heard earlier from several of our guests. And I know it's something, again, we're all very interested in. Kind of talk to us a little bit about where the ESAIC is looking at this and kind of thinking about going forward with, building that into things.
Now, for us, I think it's now the period where we bring the knots together. I think we have to have a strategy on data science in perioperative medicine. Artificial intelligence is one of the cornerstones of this science, and in Europe momentarily there's a lot of investments in that. So I think the time is now to bring, let's say, a couple of databases which are coexisting together, learn from each other, and this will not happen without artificial intelligence. Yeah. The other big thing is to bring hospital systems together, let them communicate to each other. And I think we had a lot of discussions also here about the possibility of bringing different monitoring systems, patient-related systems together and try to figure out, okay, which quality improvement steps we can make.
Yes.
And last but not least, we, as everybody, has to face an enormous shortage in workforce.
Yeah.
And I think definitely there are a lot of innovations which now comes to the market, which really makes it able that things like fluid therapy can be automated, that things like hemodynamic monitoring can be used to help the clinician or the caregiver to make the right decision in terms of decision support. And this is something which is quite new. It was a long way to go here, but I think in the meantime we achieved it, and we are close for the widespread use in clinical practice.
Yeah.
And that world's changing quickly, and our confidence is growing in that world very quickly. I was just reflecting on the fact that I was walking in this morning, and again I saw another of what appears to be very many driverless cars.
Oh, did you?
Oh, yeah, there's plenty around here.
Yeah.
And you look at it and think, oh, that's a bit weird, but it's probably much safer than all the other cars, actually.
Because humans have plenty of accidents.
It's actually probably the least likely one to hit me.
Yeah. So we hope. Lots of emerging technology, software, things that, we want to assume or believe that they're going to make our jobs easier. Is that something that, is one of the things that we're thinking about, or how do we think about it? Because some people may say, well, it's going to make my job easier, or it may actually take over my job.
I think it was indeed one, as Monty just pointed, it took us time to convince our community that the devices which are now available are really helpful, that they do not create work and that there is no risk to taking over the job. Indeed, our job has been improved. We have to do much more things than on before, and because anesthesia is, in the meantime, much more than just giving anesthesia in the operating theater. You have to make the right choices. You have to take care of the patients thereafter. You have to have a look at quality of life. So we need a lot of things, a lot of technology, I think, to allow us to stay in the same amount of quality in our core competency. And I think these discussions became more and more mature in the last 1 to 2 years, because all of us were faced, first of all, with COVID, the pandemic, but thereafter with an enormous amount of patients waiting for surgery, an enormously increasing workload, and on the other hand, significant problems to keep our people, our nurses, our physicians into the business. So I think it's a different story compared to, let's say, 5 years ago. And the other thing is that a lot of opinion makers, key opinion makers in our specialty, take a lot of time to invest their research capabilities in these systems. Yeah. They become more and more mature, trustful, and I think there will always be a discussion. And recently I did a short survey within my own department and talked to the group of young staff members below the age of 40,
youngsters,
which are very diverse.
Yeah.
And for them, it's technology is something which is part of life.
It is,
and not a, let's say, something which compromised their career perspective.
Yeah, not an addition. Thomas, from your perspective, first as a clinician, and the work that you've done in the past, but then also coming from industry, how are you looking at this?
So we have learned to embrace these technologies that we, by the way, use in everyday life.
Yeah.
On our phones, we have weather prediction apps. Absolutely. Which are based on artificial intelligence. So this
Maps,
is natural
driving
for us.
apps, yeah.
Yes, but how can we use this technology to improve the care of our patients, to increase the safety of our patients in these times of staff shortages that we just discussed? The technology might help us ensuring that patient level or even increase that patient level in a lower care environment. And this is why I got in touch with that technologies. And now I have the privilege to work in a company who is providing one of those technologies who can detect hemodynamic instability or low blood pressure, so potentially dangerous events before they even occur. Based on artificial intelligence. And this is a wonderful technology which might improve, or which we will show improves the safety of our patient and the outcome of our patients.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think performance characteristics, I was having a great lunch yesterday with somebody who's responsible for a department with lots of trainees, young doctors in it, and a young doctor. And they were saying the more that they can use as a training adjunct, the ability to say, this represents my practice behavior patterns. The reason the person who is the best at this type of thing in the department does things this way, this device is now programmed with their behavior characteristics. You don't have to, it won't do it for you, but if you follow that, you'll become better quicker.
Yeah.
So they're embracing all of that. The other side of it, which we'll get into, I'm sure, is from the research perspective.
That's what I was just going to start.
The human factors have a tendency to overwhelm many of our therapeutic interventions. There's a long history of us doing randomized controlled trials where the adherence to the protocol is actually so poor and the randomness in our practice patterns is so great that there's a very little signal despite our best efforts. There's one, I think, classical example where looking at the performance characteristics of a colloid versus a crystalloid, we used to think they were very different in how they performed, the volumes of 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 comparing one to the other. If you do an experiment with humans, and this is all published, experiment with humans, there's very little difference between the amount of colloid and crystalloid that's given. If you let a computer do it, so in other words, if you program the computer to give the fluid in response to hemodynamic variables, the colloid behaves as the textbooks say, and the crystalloid behaves as the textbooks say. So the volume difference to restore volume status is 3:1, not 1.5:1. Isn't that interesting? So a lot of these studies we've been doing have actually been a sort of experiment of random human behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that fair, Wolfgang? I know you're quite interested in this whole area. Not all of it. I over-egged that a little bit. But you know what I mean? It's quite hard to get signals separate. You have to do very big numbers to overwhelm the human factor component of it.
Absolutely. I think what we first learned whenever we do a randomized controlled trial, and we randomize on the patient level, and this trial takes place, for instance, in the PACU or on the ward, we know that the treatment teams, the nurses on the ward, learn so quickly that it's nearly impossible to do it on one ward. So I have a clear opinion that the time of these classical randomized clinical trials is over. We have a lot of high quality routine data which we can use, which much more reflects the reality and probably give us the signal which really can improve the situation. And the other thing is, I think what we also learned is that even very big pragmatic randomized controlled trials are too small and in that respect underpowered. So I think real world data, high quality real world data, adaptive platform trials where you bring people together, and a lot of other designs which are much more related to, let's say, the clinical practice, because we should not forget the randomized controlled trials are often done in a very selected group of hospitals, in those which are very interested in this kind of research and often do not reflect practice.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we've heard over the last several days, too, is with some of this emerging or even technology that's been around for a while, the pushback is, you know, the research and trying to get research done for this type of technology. It's tough. So how do you think that we're going to use some of these new trial designs to really kind of get us to a place where the average clinician can actually trust and believe in some of these new things that can potentially make our job better and safer for the patient?
Well, I think a couple of research groups have built up a reputation. The European Society is a research group comprised about 400 to 600 hospitals. So we have a very big foundation, and within these hospitals there are a lot of practical anesthesiologists busy in generating data. And what we realized when we started that program, getting the first results, is that this convinces people much more than isolated research in small groups. That's one thing. And the other thing is we really need to connect to our community a bit better than we did it in the past. And that's what also happened here. In the past, we were busy with an annual meeting, a lot of lectures giving by one person, a room more or less full of listeners. But nowadays, we implemented a lot of different learning, education, communication strategy. In Europe, we do every Tuesday an education Tuesday.
Oh, yeah.
We monitor things like the clicks on our podcast. The webinar is quite effective, and our, let's say, speaker population is much more diverse than it was in the past. So everybody who comes up with a good idea, we try to give him a place. And that's a beautiful cooperation with our community, but also with our partners from industry.
Yeah, it's good.
I have a question to Wolfgang. Please help me understand, because in my new function, I often come across clinicians when I talk to them about our technology. They tell me, oh, show me the evidence. There is no RCT proving this or that statement that you make. So help me, how can we convince those physicians in realizing that we cannot do randomized controlled trials for every questions that we have?
Very interesting question, because I think it's what you have spoken about is a mindset of people, and this mindset is based on something like a number, like a significance in a trial, whether or not it is clinically relevant. What we are now looking for, what are the clinical meaningful questions? In other words, one of the most relevant clinical meaningful questions is, avoidance of complication. Because every complication costs a lot, and this complication is based normally on one patient. And probably you will never cover it, but it will, or it can disturb the whole workflow. The other thing is, I think that a lot of decisions should be made on, or based on clinical knowledge. In other words, we had a culture that everything without a proven randomized controlled trial, with or without good methodology, was a higher level than just the assumption that this can improve patient care in a proven way. And we have to accept that a couple of these things are not part or cannot be part of a classical research design. And in that respect, I have a lot of hopes in using real-world evidence data, and probably you get a bit more information to convince others. But I think it will take some time.
So I understand this is not only your personal opinion, but maybe also the opinion of the medical society that you're representing here?
No, I think what we are planning for next year, because we were asked to, is to reconsider the term perioperative study design.
Yeah.
Because there were a couple of meetings in the last years, and nearly every big group came to the same conclusions. That our classical design of pragmatic RCTs is not the way which will bring us forward in the future. So we have to organize that, and then we come up with a position paper on that.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Yeah, it is wonderful. So in closing, one of the questions that I'm been dying to ask is that as a clinician, as a professor, as a leadership within this international organization, one of the questions is, how do we go forward as a profession in all of these different organizations to be able to partner with the inevitable transition and use of technology in our space with industry to go forward? Because we can't do it without them. It's part of what's going to be our lives, and already is really, to keep things going. Because these trials, whether or not, whatever the design is, they're expensive, they're difficult to do, and people who want to do it in real world settings don't have a ton of resources. I mean, if you're not academic, you don't have anything. It's really hard to do it. I'm trying to do it myself.
Yeah.
But I also want to keep things, valid and above board, as some people say. But I find that's kind of a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, because we and also our partners from industry had a certain approach to get things done. It was quite often the approach of key opinion leaders, advising, etc. I think the way to go is that we bring these people together, because my basic assumption is we share one common goal, and that's improvement of patient care.
Yeah, absolutely.
And starting from that point, we have to look, okay, what are our ideas about methodology, new drugs, new strategies to improve patient care, and this needs to be logically in an interaction with our partners. So we will create a couple of forums where we quite open discuss what are the meaningful questions from our community, and fit that within a strategy from an industrial partner to improve patient care. And I think in particular the European Union has set up a couple of research programs, funding programs, which are focused on precisely this point, where they actively ask to bring leading academic clinicians and leading companies in the field together to figure out what's our possibilities, what are the possibilities to go to this common goal.
Yeah.
And then it's probably also a bit more simple than it was in the past.
Yeah.
And you good things tend to come out of crises and burning platforms and that sort of thing. And we learnt a lot during COVID, but also very common discussion now is the staffing challenge, the staffing crisis, I think is a fair word. You don't want to be over dramatic about it, but it's very, very real, which means that we are embracing, I keep saying it, standardization, automation, decision support, remote observation. We have to, because if we're going to continue to do things very, very safely, we have to accept what you can learn from the airline industry, for example. You when you jump into the anesthetic room, the indicator should always be on the left and the steering wheel should make the
Yeah.
car go to the right if you turn it to the right. And it is, we're making sense there, Wolfgang?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. This afternoon I will show a picture with a lot of empty wards due to the fact that there are no
Nobody
nurses
take care of
anymore.
them. Yeah.
And I will show another picture which shows our remote control area, because what we should not forget is with new technology, we have for the first time in our history the possibility to stay connected with the patient. And the hospital most likely will much more go in the direction of the patients than that we always ask the patient to come to us.
Yeah.
And I think, as you said, there are beautiful examples from different industry already doing this transformation, and we are on the forefront of doing it also.
Yeah, in medicine. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen. And good luck to you in the next 2 years in your incoming presidency. I'm sure it'll be wonderful, and we'll be sure to catch up with you again.
For sure.
Monty.
And all those people who are desperate to come to the ESAIC
Yeah,
meeting, where is it?
next year.
Roughly when is it, and where do they find the information?
You find the information on the homepage. It's in the beautiful town of Munich. In the end of May, beginning of June. So a beautiful country, a beautiful town.
My
and
hometown.
beautiful
I was just going to say, I thought,
Yeah,
Thomas,
yeah,
you were
yeah.
from there. Yeah.
and beautiful weather.
So Thomas, will you be having a party at your
I was
house?
just going to
Can
say, you
everyone come?
hosted anything.
So we have to make the Oktoberfest, which is actually in September, now in, when is it, June?
June,
So that we
early.
can celebrate early altogether.
That's right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it sitting down with us. Monty, I'm so glad you could catch up with Top Med Talk.
Thank you for
this
letting
time.
me back in the chair.
I know. And thank you for listening to Top Med Talk. You know, you can always find us at topmedtalk.com. All of our conversations from the meeting this weekend, from ESA this past summer, and all of our meetings that we go to across the globe throughout the last 7 years are up on the website. So you can find just about anything there. We're on social, Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. We're there. And you can watch these videos on YouTube. And if you like it, give us a thumbs up. Thumbs up. That always helps us out. Thumbs up. Cheers, everybody. Thanks.
Take care.
Well, hello and welcome back to Top Med Talk here at Anesthesiology 2023. It's the annual meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host, and I'm joined by our guest host, Guy Ledbrook. Hello, Guy.
It's great to be here. The sun's out. The fog's rolled away. It's terrific.
It is absolutely terrific. Guy, it has been a phenomenal 3 days, and we cannot thank you enough from the bottom of our hearts for filling in that chair and sitting there and having these great conversations with us.
Heck, it's completely selfish. I've learned an enormous amount over the last 2 or 3 days, which has been invaluable.
Yeah, it has. We love to take all this information with us. I have to tell you, it's not completely altruistic that we share it with the world. We're glad to get it for ourselves, for sure. But we did want to give a big shout out to the ASA as well for providing us with this gorgeous booth, this space. We couldn't do it without you. We couldn't be here having these conversations, being able to record those and put them out to the world without your generous support. So thank you so much. And also to our generous sponsors, our partners in Top Med Talk, Medtronic, GE, Edwards Life Sciences. Without you helping us to keep the lights on, to keep going, we couldn't keep Top Med Talk free and open to the world. So we have over people listening in over 100 countries. So wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for listening. We have had over 2,000 podcasts, over 2 million downloads. So couldn't be possible without your support. So thank you so, so much. So we've had some great conversations, like Guy said, over the last weekend, and this one is sure to be as wonderful. We have a returning guest, actually, Jipeng Wang from Louisville, my hometown, at the University of Louisville, professor there. Jipeng, thank you so much for joining us.
That's right. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here again. Yeah. And I really thank you all for putting all the knowledge out there for everybody. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much for all you do.
Well, I really appreciate that. That means a lot. I know we had been for a long time trying to make this happen. I think we caught up this past year.
AUA.
Yeah. AUA, the IARS, all those alphabet soup, but the International Association of
Association of University Anesthesiologists.
University of Anesthesiologists, that's right. So it all came together in Denver this last year. We had a great conversation there. You can find that on topmedtalk.com. But today, I thought we'd catch up on a topic that we really have not talked about for some time now. About brain health, about depth of anesthesia, and really using different types of monitoring to help drive where we're going. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to give anesthesia right now. We're giving anesthesia in a lot of different places inside and outside the OR. And I think it's a very appropriate topic, that we kind of start bringing up again. So tell us a little bit about, where we are with depth of anesthesia monitoring and kind of some of the different ways that we're doing that now.
Okay. So anesthesia is, everybody thinks anesthesia is pretty easy. But when patients come to surgery, right, when I talk to them, I said, are you worried about anything? Do you have any concerns? They always worry about anesthesia more than surgery itself. Yeah. They say, I worry about I'm not going to wake up.
Yeah.
And so that's
or that I may actually wake up in the middle.
Exactly.
Something like that. Yeah.
You're definitely right. And so Desiree and so when we talk to those patients, we say, you know what? We can figure it out how deep you are with anesthesia. So it used to be in the old days, we really rely on the vital signs. We look at the heart rate, like the blood pressure. All, worst come to all is if the patient is moving or not. Yeah. If the patient is moving, we think the patient might be awake. And probably at least 20, 30 years ago, so, some smart people came up with the idea, say, why don't we look at the brain activity, so EEG, electroencephalogram. And so what that is, really analyze the brain activity and to figure out how deep you are on anesthesia. So we are anesthesia providers, and we're a non-neurologist. So for us to look at the 12 leads or 12 channel, 16 channel EEG, I don't understand what that means. So that's why really I would say probably 15, 20 years ago, they started using process EEG. So what that means is they take all the electrical activity of the brain together, then really analyze with a really advanced algorithm down there. And so what they come up with one number. So 0 to 100, and 100 means you're really, really awake. 0 means you're really, really asleep. And with anesthesia, what we try to get to really the number between about 40 to 60. That's what we try to do. And there's still some debate regarding should I use process EEG, should I not use process EEG. And one of the things I would say though, I teach residents all the time, I teach students, and I see some of the younger residents, and they say, well, I can figure it out how deep the anesthesia is by just looking at the patient, check their heart rate, blood pressure. And I said, this is what I said to them in real words. I said, I've been doing this for 21 years. I consider myself, pretty decent anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. There's no way for me to know. And especially nowadays, we have so many patients on beta blockers.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
I would say the complexity of our patients now, I mean, age, comorbidities, the medications that they're on, if we're using multimodal pain management and not, are doing things to manipulate their blood pressure, those crude and, indicators that we use for a very long time are not, they're not really, I don't know. Guy, what about you? Your thought?
Yeah, look, I wish I could kind of estimate how deeply my patient is, but I'm using a population average, and our population is kind of getting broader, figuratively and literally, actually, over time.
Right.
But I think the other thing that we've heard this week is the hypotension and really all the things that go along with that. And I watch people without processed EEG trying to adjust blood pressure with the volatile or whatever anesthetic agent you're using. But surely you need to separate that. And because especially in an older population, using concomitant medications, you can be surprised how little they need. And if you're fighting hypotension and you think the mechanism's all wrong, it just does seem to be a bit perverse. So I agree exactly with what you're saying.
Oh, thank you. I fully agree with your statement too. And I think that the other way we actually check the depth of anesthesia really based on the population study, right? We'll use MEC, minimal alveolar concentration. This is really the definition of MEC is if I use this concentration, 50% of the people will not move to surgical stimulation. You just don't want to be that 50%. You just don't want to be that 50%. So that's why.
You don't want to be that 50% if you're paralyzed.
Oh, you're definitely right. And especially nowadays, like you said, so we pretty much paralyze the patient most of the cases.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want the patient to move. We want to ensure have good surgical conditions. So I think nowadays now to monitor the depth of anesthesia is. I told my resident, I said, this is still practicing anesthesia. But you're practicing anesthesia in the 70s. If that's what you want to learn, that's fine. But I want to teach you more than anesthesia, so how you do it.
Yeah.
So in my practice, I pretty much for all my cases, I use process EEG monitoring pretty much all my cases.
Yeah.
Even for the MEC cases, the monitoring anesthesia cases.
Yeah. So kind of give the right level of sedation for
exactly. Yeah. And we do a lot of regional cases. We do not do spinal cases. Yep. And it used to be we just give a little midazolam and to say, hey, you're pretty numb. You shouldn't worry about anything. But nowadays, nobody want to lay on the table for 2 hours without any sedation.
Yeah.
So they don't want to be awake. So in those patients, I actually put the base monitor on there. I want their base 50, 60, kind of on the higher end.
Yeah.
And I think then the next question would be what are the evidence?
Yeah.
Are there any evidence to support using the EEG? So I think everybody's trying to quote the study in 2019 that engaged.
Yeah.
And their study actually showed there's no differences if you use the EEG versus not process EEG versus not using that. And
what was the outcome that they were
post-op delirium?
Yeah, delirium was what they were looking at.
Right.
Yes.
They look at the post-op delirium, but if you dig into that study, so in their control group is you still put the base monitor on there, but you cover the number up, so you don't know. In the intervention group, they actually let the anesthesiologist decide. So it's not so you're gonna keep the base at a 40 to 60. If you actually dig into that study, many people in the intervention group actually have the base below 40. So it's to me, it's a little bit biased. It's not a fair comparison because you did not achieve your goal to keep the base 40, 60 in the intervention group. There are several meta-analysis, cochlear analysis out there right now to see it will decrease your post-op delirium. But there's really no difference in the post-op cognitive dysfunction. And I think that's another thing that's really becoming a significant issue for many people.
Oh yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
And whether or not we're looking at post-op brain function, cognitive dysfunction, and other benefits of using process EEG, I think is getting the depth right and making sure it's right for the level of patients that we're taking. Because I know I have plenty of colleagues that don't use process EEG. I am actually a user myself, and I have been surprised so many times when you have, an 80-year-old little lady who is there, and she actually is on a ton of medications, and she is taking a ton of anesthetic, and her vital signs are just fine. And then I have a 50-year-old guy who is strong and robust, and it takes very little to keep them asleep. And, I've been trying to fight a blood pressure because he's on ACE inhibitors and all these other medications, and it's really tough. And so I think that, we lose by just saying that we're only looking at this one thing for this particular monitoring. To me, at least that's my opinion.
And also in an era where we're increasingly focused on the use of regional anesthesia and common blocks.
Yeah.
So you often don't need as much, and there's no MAC number on the machine will account for that.
Right.
So regional anesthesia potentially great for pain relief, but the risk is we're overdoing it, and without measuring it, it's kind of pretty hard to know, isn't it?
Right, definitely. And just like that's what I was saying, though, everybody is so different.
Yeah.
I had a patient, I was, running gas, I running 0.2 MAC. I would never do that if I don't have the process EEG. I'm like, that patient's going to wake up. Yeah. And I had patient that I thought that patient going to need a lot, really not much at all.
Know, yeah.
Vice versa.
Yeah.
Some of them, you're like, okay, this 80-year-old, 0.5 MAC will get that patient. Oh, no, they won't. So
or TIVA right now. We do it a lot of TIVA, and that, you have no idea. I feel like that's, where are we on this? And vital signs, late indicator, sometimes of where you are on that.
Yeah, and I think too, the consequences of anesthesia, whether it be the agents or the whole context, is a little scary. There was that observational study out of Taiwan, I think in the Lancet relatively recently, looking at the delayed downstream effects on cognitive function and Alzheimer's or dementia, suggesting this was regional anesthesia versus general anesthesia, with a pretty strong signal, very big database.
Right.
You're not going to measure that for 10 or 15 years.
Right.
So that was regional anesthesia versus general anesthesia, but it raises the issue of whether grades of general anesthesia actually might feed into that as well. So, that was in the Lancet. I think it's kind of sobering when it's not just maybe the cognitive function in subsequent days or weeks, but maybe in years downstream.
Years to come. And I actually had a patient a few weeks ago. That patient came to me and said, I'm happy that you're doing anesthesia for me, but last time I had anesthesia for a small procedure, I was not the same for 6 months.
Yes.
So had a significant cognitive decline after the anesthesia. And that patient was not that old, in the 50, 60 years old. So I think that, I think we have, when we do anesthesia, we have several goals. One, make sure the patient is comfortable. Two, make sure we do no harm. And I think that's something that really, to me, that's really important. And every time when I walk into the room when the patient's hypotensive, and many times when I see the gas was on 2 MAC.
Correct.
The propofol was a 300. I said maybe we should come down on those first. And so it's really I think it's really the right dose for the right patient at the right time.
And you have to have tools to help you, refine that and really be able to get, to individualize care and not just as a population. I think as you said.
Well, we talked about neuromuscular blockade the other day, yesterday, I think, wasn't it? In fact, if you're flying blind, you really could be kind of anywhere. Right. And we have the technology and the recommendations and often leave it in the drawer. Right. And, I think EEG is a bit like that too, or a lot like that as well. We're living in the 21st century, isn't it? Yeah. So let's use it. Let's use the benefits of that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And, there are several comments I hear from my colleagues. One is I can do this without. And so my question to them is also, and don't, when we do cases, right, when we take care of patients, I think the first thing is you got to put your ego aside. It doesn't matter how good you think you are. It's really what good or harm can you do to the patient. Yeah. And to me is, if this is something that can help me to protect my patient from myself, I'm going to use it.
From yourself.
and so I think that's really, the first thing. The second thing is really...
hold on one sec. They're making an announcement. This is live, you guys. I don't understand what they're saying, but
right,
go ahead, Siobhan.
I couldn't hear. And I think the other thing is really when there's the other thing that people talk about is, well, it's such old technology, it's such an old algorithm. So I actually study that. So this algorithm was developed in 1998, and they're still using the same algorithm. And my counter argument on that is, this is actually the best studied monitor ever, the brain monitor.
Yeah.
So there are so many studies coming out to show this actually works pretty well. And there's a saying is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And then I did talk to people from Medtronic. They actually are working on to refine those, to update the algorithm.
Okay.
So
Well, that was going to be my next question. Kind of in closing, what do you think the future of process EEG and its place in in operating rooms and outside of operating rooms where we're doing other type of anesthesia? What do you think the future really holds for that?
So if I really be ambitious about the whole thing, is eventually I think will be closed loop control anesthesia.
Yeah.
So meaning the anesthesia gas or the TIVA medication will be linked to the EEGs, and the system will automatically control where we want to keep the base at.
Yeah.
And they are much better than what we do as a human
The
being.
closed loop system too. We've talked a lot about this or open loop, depending on how you look at it. Instead of, and we all as clinicians know this, you give a medicine, the blood pressure shoots up or goes way down. And you give bolus doses.
Right.
These are, or even with infusions, it's hard to kind of stick your finger on where you're going to actually land. This is taking all that information and doing microdosing of all the medications, whether it be anesthetic gas or vasopressors, and keeping it all where it's just straight, and a smooth line of how our patients do. So I think that's really exciting. I think it'll be really interesting.
We actually been working with a professor from UC San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
So what he developed was pretty nice. So he used a closed loop to control the blood pressure. Was able to maintain the blood pressure in a really narrow range. And I think the same thing can be used for process EEGs. Maybe connect with the blood pressure, right? So you try to avoid hypotension, make sure you don't give too much anesthesia gas. And I think that most likely will be able to help the patient. And whether, I think to be honest with you, I think the technology is there. And I think United States, we're always lack regarding innovations. So actually the closed loop system has been on the market in Europe, but not in the United States. So we need to catch up, and
Yeah, and one of the things that I always say, kind of final thought here, is that I think you mentioned it before, Japong, is that we don't want to cause harm to our patient. The problem with anesthesia right now is, and we've said this before, we drop off a patient, we're done. We're on to the next one. And you may never hear about those downstream effects ever.
Long-term effects.
Unless it's your relative.
Unless it is your relative or you.
And that's probably not the best way we should look at our quality control, by accidentally bumping into a relative. It would be nice if we had the systems to really look at that, those lingering consequences.
Yeah. But when you say you don't need it because your patients do great, you don't actually know what's happening to your patients.
You really don't.
Once they leave you. I mean, some people do have that luxury, but not all of us do. So.
Not all of us. I mean, we're so busy doing next cases.
Yeah.
And to me, it's still, as an anesthesia provider, let's make sure we do not do harm first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good note to end on. Japong, thank you so much for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy meeting for you and for a lot of folks out there. So cheers to you, all the great work you're doing. Hopefully we'll catch up soon to hear more, okay?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank
you so much. And thank you for listening to Top Med Talk. You can find us at topmedtalk.com. We're on social media, your favorite platforms there. We also are on your favorite podcatcher. So whether it's Apple, Spotify, we're there. And if you're watching any of our YouTube videos, be sure to give us a shout out, a thumbs up on that video. That always helps us out as well. Again, thank you so much to our sponsors. We couldn't do this without you. Cheers, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Well, hello and welcome back to Top Med Talk. It is our final interview here at Anesthesiology 2023, the annual meeting of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. It has been a fabulous 3 days here in the exhibit hall and in San Francisco. Thank you so much to the ASA for providing this beautiful booth here, this space. We have had a fantastic time, wonderful conversations that you can find at topmedtalk.com. I'm Desiree Chappell. I'm your host, and I'm joined by my guest co-host, Guy Ledbrook. Guy, it's been a great 3 days, hasn't it?
It's been fantastic. It's sad to see it coming to an end, but in fact it lingers on X and YouTube and all those things. So
That's right.
Yeah, it'll be there for us for a while.
Forever, because we're talking about the internet here, so you'll never be able to get rid of us. Guy, for our listeners that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm an anesthesiologist from Adelaide in South Australia, and I work increasingly in post-operative care. I'm a health economist these days, and I work a lot with industry on drug and device development as well. So a few hats to wear.
A couple, like all of our guests and everyone here on Top Med Talk, we all wear a lot of hats. Our next guest is no different, and this is a guest that has joined us many times here on Top Med Talk, and it is such a pleasure to have her here, Professor Bobby Jean Schweitzer. Bobby Jean, I love that you're back sitting with us. And I think last year you actually were our last one, saving the best for last here at Top Med Talk at ASA.
Well, I guess I'm the closer.
You are the closer, that's right. Well, have you had a good meeting this year?
I have, and it's great to see you again, Desiree. It's always a pleasure. And
it hasn't been too long, has it?
No, it hasn't been. We've had some fun times.
We went to Ireland for the Dingle Conference, which is fantastic. Actually, all three of us were there this year.
Terribly hard work it was too.
My first trip to Ireland, and I had to sample the gin, and I had to sample the Guinness.
I think you became a fan of Guinness, didn't you?
I love Guinness. I don't even like beer, but I tell everybody Guinness is not really beer. It's not carbonated. And I love gin, and I never liked gin before.
Really?
Especially that Dingle local gin.
Yeah, I know, the Dingle gin. You should look for it. It's good. Although we shouldn't probably be talking about that.
That's true. No. And,
It was a lot of water we drank, too.
We sampled it. We said we sampled it.
We did, adult beverages.
We sampled.
So switching gears back to the ASA, great meeting so far, yeah. You've been busy.
It is a great meeting. I mean, I think that, San Francisco has turned out nicely. Yes. There were some concerns around San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I think that they've done a good job with the signage outside. You're directing us to the center, the Moscone Center. The weather's been lovely.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes,
one morning it was foggy and my hair got frizzy. But
that's why my hair's up today, because it was so bad.
Mine's been fine.
Guy, I know.
Yeah, Guy. I'm sure you worked really hard on that hairdo this morning.
Yeah, that's great. So you have been involved with the ASA and in lots of programs within and adjacent to the program every year. Is that correct?
Yes. So, I don't know. I keep, at the time, when I start to agree to do a panel or put in a, lecture, or I agree to be in a committee, it kind of happens one at a time. And then all of a sudden it's like it's all come together. And I'm like, I don't have time to sleep.
Your schedule's like booked out every hour on the hour.
But it's fun because I get to do a lot. I get to see a lot of people. I get to connect again. And I always learn so much.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I keep coming back to learn something.
Well, Barbara Jean, if someone out there who they don't know you, which I find that hard to believe, especially as Top Med Talk listeners, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, maybe even some of the organizations that you're involved in? Because you too wear very many hats.
Yeah, I don't like to get bored. So I trained in internal medicine, practiced for a few years before deciding going into anesthesiology. And that actually, I think, really set the stage for what I do, because when I was an internist, I used to pre-op patients and do clearances and evaluate them for surgery. And I think probably within about 2 hours of starting my anesthesiology residency, I wanted to apologize to all my patients and all the previous anesthesiologists, surgeons, and let them know that I really had no idea what I was doing. Yeah. Nobody had ever trained me. And so I very rapidly became interested in this evolving field of preoperative medicine. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing it, there weren't too many people doing it. So that has its advantages. I always say, if you want to be successful, pick something that no one else is doing. Yeah, no one else is interested in doing.
And pave the way.
But that actually turned out to be something that later down the line, people were interested in.
A lot of people, yeah.
And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, I think.
Yeah.
So I've been involved with ASA for some period of time. I'm really thrilled that I think that the offerings here, the educational opportunities now, have really started to grow in the perioperative period, that section of medicine, the preoperative space. And not just for, risk assessments, but actually optimizations.
Yeah.
And, driving science to really help us identify those patients who maybe should not have surgery.
Yeah.
I'm sure Guy's going to have some things to say about that, but at least need to maybe be better cared for before they have surgery, while they're having surgery, and after they have surgery. But I'm involved in SAM, the Society for Ambulatory Anesthesia, a past president. I'm involved in the Society for Perioperative Anesthesia and Quality Improvement, a past president. So thank you for asking about those. I do want to put in a plug. Many of the people that are involved in those are here.
Yeah.
They're part of ASA as well. And SAMBA is a component society of ASA.
Oh, okay.
And so usually I get involved. Saturday we had our, SAMBA meeting. And I actually lectured at the military meeting of the Armed Services
so
meeting,
interesting.
which was a new opportunity. I was thrilled that they asked me. And, it's so humbling to stand in front of these people who, I think, we all, are taking care of patients, and we talk about, how we don't have the skin in the game, right? It's the patients who suffer the harm and outcomes. But when you talk to these military guys, you realize that they are actually putting themselves, in harm's way.
In harm's way, yeah.
To care for their patients even, right? Because they're in those front lines.
Yeah, and
and they're
austere
taking-
environments and things like that, yeah.
Yeah, so that was really an honor.
Yes.
And then just here, I've had, I think, 2 panels. I've had a refresher course lecture. I've had lots of committee meetings. I'm the chair of the perioperative abstract committee, so I just wanted to put in a plug for people who please. The abstract site is not open yet,
Yeah.
but it will be opening. We are always looking for good abstracts, particularly in the perioperative period.
Uh-huh.
And, pre-op medicine, pre-op optimization, research, quality improvement. There's a whole, a lot of different things can encompass, be submitted to us. So look for us if you go to submit.
And it's pre-op and post-op if people are doing post-op work too
It's
as
even,
well.
we call it peri-op.
Yeah.
Because there's even things that you can imagine that are intra-op. So I mean, the ASA could have pigeonholed things into categories, right? Regional, OB, cardiac, and critical care. And sometimes we're a bit of a catch-all because it doesn't exactly. But that's okay. If you're not sure, submit to us because we can rearrange it, like if we think it belongs in a different one. Mm-hmm. So we encourage people to do that. And I'm the vice chair of the educational section for Peri-Op.
Oh,
And that's where you submit for your presentations for next year. That site is already open, and it's open until, I want to say, November 27th or 26th, sometime around there. Please don't absolutely count that as the deadline. I'd hate for you to miss the deadline.
Yeah.
So go on site, but it is open for another few weeks. And there's panels, there's workshops, there's PBLDs, there's refresher course lectures, there's snap talks, there's a whole variety of things.
Cool.
So please look at that, and reach out to me individually if you have any questions about either of those, either the abstract submissions or the educational submission.
Always looking for real world experiences and people out there doing it that may not have considered it before, but this is a great platform.
Yes, and we really want to diversify, and we want women, we want new presenters who've never presented, we want people outside of the United States. Sometimes, ASA can be a bit U.S.-centric.
Yeah.
So we welcome the people from Australia and the UK and the Asian and South America to contingent.
There's a large
Please.
contingency here of international
Very much
attendees.
so.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's great. So, Bobby Jean, we can go down so many different paths here, but one of the things I wanted to talk to you today, because we actually have not talked about this in a while. One of your passions, I believe, is caring for and really figuring out how to take care of the frail patient and learning and understanding frailty and how that affects how they're taken care of in surgery, how we prepare them for surgery, how we take care of them in surgery, and then what happens to them post-operatively. Did I capture that?
Yes, very much so. And it's not for unselfish reasons. As I get older, perhaps moving along that frailty, every once in a while I do a frailty assessment on myself.
Stop.
To be No, but seriously, my mother lived till 98.
Oh, wow.
And her sister just passed away at 106.
Oh, my my goodness.
And so if I'm lucky enough to have some of their genes, I probably will pass into that
Yeah.
frailty, population. And I think that, as we have an aging population, and it's not just, I do want to point out, is you don't have to be old to be frail.
That's right.
You can be younger. In fact, there was a really great article that was published by Dan McIsaac and team out of Canada recently that I had an opportunity to interview Dan for the anesthesiology podcast. And they looked at costs of care of frail patients. And they found interesting and ironically, at least to me, very surprising, that the younger people who were frail actually cost more than the older people that were frail. And at first I thought, maybe they just were killing off some of those older ones so it didn't cost so much because they looked at, intra-op and pre-op, intra-op, and post-op care. And but they accounted for that. So they, you would understand it more from your economics training of all the way they did the statistics and the matching and, the cohorts. But they, so I think that we don't want to overlook and think that just older people can be frail.
Yeah.
But I do think...
Before we go on, tell me a little bit, and just for quickly, talk about what a young, frail person looks like. Because I think sometimes that's actually, I'm thinking like, well, I think I know, but...
Well, so the first... you're not far from that. The first, I think, if you ask people about frailty, it's kind of like that Supreme Court justice who said pornography is hard to define, but you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
The way you have to look. That's very telling.
Exactly. Oh, okay.
So, I think, we think of the frail person as like, that older person maybe has kyphoscoliosis, using their walker, using their cane, having difficulty getting up out of a chair, living in a SNF.
Yeah. Skilled nursing facility, yeah.
Yes, a skilled nursing facility. But, we have very defined, useful tools. Again, another plug for Dan McIsaac, who's done a lot of work on frailty in this. He, a couple of years ago now, maybe more, I always think everything's a couple of years ago, but he published an article in, I believe it was Anesthesiology, I'm almost certain, that looked at 5 different measures, validated measures of frailty, and compared them. And these things range from sort of the disease-based, definition of frailty, which is basically your comorbidities, all the way to functional, definitions of frailty and hybrid systems. The original ones and the ones that we borrowed from the geriatricians were very heavily on functional capacity. How fast you could walk or how long you could walk, whether you could get up and out of a chair, how quickly you could do that, fall risks, grip strength. And that, those took some time and effort to do. They were, often hours. I used to say if the patient lived through the geriatrician's frailty assessment,
then they'd be fine.
They weren't frail. And, that was cumbersome in the preoperative period.
Yeah.
And we don't always have that much time to do that or that much resources. And then it also, we can't do that with telemedicine. So, COVID came along. We weren't even seeing some of the patients, in person. And then we have some, patients we want to resource to just telephone visits or even electronic through our computer systems. I don't think one size doesn't fit all when it comes to preoperative medicine. So I was thrilled when the frailty index, I believe I've got the right term, the frailty index was the frailty assessment tool that Dan identified as actually the best one.
Really?
Because it was just a disease-based, comorbidity-based. So it essentially adds up, hypertension, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, ischemic heart disease, OSA. And, it doesn't get to the whole point, right? People say, well, yeah, but maybe those, but what we do know is that, unfortunately, when you have all the diseases, you do tend to be functionally, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like so many things that sometimes we don't, another test may add a little bit, a 1% or, but is it worth the expense and the effort to do that?
Yeah.
Or do we have time to do that? Yeah. So sometimes, better is the enemy of good enough.
Yeah.
Or what we can design that applies to 70% of our patients may be better than trying to capture 100% of our patients. Particularly when we're not doing well with most of the frail patients, I think, yet at this point.
Yeah.
Let's
The
start
kind of
someplace.
law of diminishing returns. I mean, you get most bang for your buck, is that right, out of this? And probably less when you get into the difficult to deliver kind of lengthy, complicated things. Have I got that right?
I think that's said so much better than I just said all of those words. You summarized it very succinctly, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So a frail person is not necessarily like you described as functionally just in looking, they
Right,
look
no.
frail. You could have someone who's actually obese or, with a lot that doesn't look like the tiny little grandma,
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I'm sorry you asked me, actually, this is what, you can't ask me two questions at
No,
once,
it's okay.
Desiree?
No.
But because you had asked me about what a young, frail person looks like.
Yeah.
So, the young, frail people were often people who had a heavy burden of chronic disease as
Yeah.
well, often cancer,
Yeah.
undergoing, aggressive
Yeah.
chemotherapies.
Cachectic and things like
Yes, malnourished. Sometimes, substance abuse and tobacco
Yeah,
use,
true.
and, quadriplegia.
Yeah.
Or muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, some of these diseases that we don't even see sometimes in older people because they don't live long enough to have those diseases.
Yeah.
So, but in a younger person, those kinds of diseases can result in significant,
Yeah.
frailty.
So we talk about frailty and like functional reserve and things like that. What about of the brain and like how does all this work? Because that's one of the things we've talked a lot on Top Men Talk in the past. We haven't kind of talked about it much lately.
Well, you're asking me at a time when my brain's not working so well right now, but
It's been a long day.
I feel like it's been picked kind of clean.
Yeah.
So, obviously brain health is so important. And I think brain health and aging and frailty all go hand in hand, right? They're like Venn diagrams that
Yeah.
overlap. And it doesn't, some patients who are not physically frail will have, be cognitively at risk.
Yeah.
Because of, underlying conditions that they have, cerebral vascular disease or other things, or, they have seizure disorders
Yeah.
and they've had, insults to their brain. We know that, a damaged brain in the past appears to be a more vulnerable brain. But then, yes, the aging brain, I'd like to think that it doesn't matter, if you stay healthy. I do my crosswords. I do, what is Wordle? I
Wordle.
Wordle
Say
every
it's
day.
Wordle.
I do that other spelling thing that the New York Times, I feel like at the end of the day, before I can go to bed, I have a whole other hour I have to run through my little games.
For your brain health. I love it.
I don't know if missing out on the sleep is like countering all that.
No, is this because I think not getting enough sleep sometimes can contribute to that.
But, I know there are a lot of really good presentations here. Some of them I didn't have a chance to get to because I was too busy doing other things. But I do really, really think that that's so important. And it's so key to what we do as anesthesia providers, right? Like, we are so fixated on the effects of our anesthetic practices on the lungs and the kidneys and the heart. But we forget that really the target organ is the brain.
Yeah.
But I think it's that we've missed, we haven't understood the brain nearly as well as we have these other organs. We can't test things as well. We don't have the data, the randomized controlled trials. But, we know that it's two extremes of age, both very young, the older patients probably are at risk. I think the problem is that it looks like that still the overwhelming population of relatively healthy older adults will still do well with most well-conducted anesthetics, but not all of them. So there's a slice of even those healthy ones will have post-op cognitive dysfunction, delirium, or loss of what we talk about executive functioning.
Yes.
And I think that's what's been sort of so hard for us to also appreciate that, after an anesthetic, you all feel a little bit woozy and a little bit fuzzy around the edges, and we tell them not to drive and make important decisions. And I've stopped telling people to stop operating heavy equipment because most of us in the U.S. now, Guy, you're an exception. You have this farm and you have heavy equipment. Exactly. So you'd have to keep telling you to stop operating heavy equipment. But
I'm not sure it's wise for me to use that whether I've had an anesthetic or not. But anyway, that's a separate issue. Yeah.
I grew up on a farm. I can operate a little bit of heavy equipment. I used to think I could, but I don't do it routinely anymore. Yeah. But then, we think we recover after that period of time, right? But we recover to, pay our bills, do our basic kind of functioning. But when you talk to people who function at a really high level, and I remember I first had this aha moment when I was actually a resident back in Boston, and I had an opportunity to take care of some professors from MIT and Harvard who were these, like Nobel Prize winning people and like functioning on a really high level. Yeah. And to a person, when I would see them, usually it was in the pre-op clinic when I'd be interviewing them, they would say, I'm not sure I was ever the same after I had. Or it took me literally weeks, if not months. And they're like, I could do basic stuff. Sure, I could teach the course that I taught all along. But when I was trying to talk to my postdocs, or I was trying to really like delve into some really, complicated, sophisticated mathematical or economic question, I didn't feel like I was holding my own the way I used to. So, those were anecdotes.
Yep.
But when I heard them over and over again, and this was way before people were talking about this thing, I started thinking, there may be something to this. Again, listen to our patients sometimes.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
I mean, obviously they're very well attuned to the fact that they're just off a bit. Have we got, or are we getting tools to be able to better measure that and better judge that? Or is that still a sort of bit of a stretch goal? I don't think so. I think it gets to that, they call it executive functioning of testing, in this little higher level. I think that when patients are tested with those kinds of nascent tools, I believe that this is not my real specialty, so I don't want to overspeak. I think we're getting and recognizing that is generally when we're seeing the people who are having effects, that by all other accounts, they're not sitting there drooling, or they can't get their, dressed in the morning. Yeah. So they, by all, they don't appear to be.
So they're fine.
Yeah, they're fine. I also think this silent strokes and the increased risk of recognizing the patients, we didn't, I think, we weren't attuned to that because some of that was being overlooked because it looked like it was just a little confusion, a little delirium. They're not quite back yet. I'm going to tell you an anecdote if I can, a story. My next door neighbor was a CEO, PhD, University of Chicago MBA, well-trained, smart guy who had retired. He was in his early 70s. He used to run, 5-10 kilometers every day.
Oh, my gosh.
On the lakefront, lived right next to me in Chicago. Lovely guy. Could talk about so many things, particularly wines. He was from Austria. And one day he came back from running, and I was out in my yard, I think, or giving the mail, and over the fence, he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. He said, I've been feeling this kind of funny feeling in my chest. I used to get it sort of I was, at the end of the 10K. Then I started getting it like 5K. Now I'm starting to find I can't even go that far. And I got to stop and I got to rest. And I said, asking me for more questions. It wasn't a pain, it was this sort of heaviness. I'm like,
okay.
That sounds like angina. Yeah. I'm like, have you told your PCP? No. I'm like, I think you should call your PCP or I can get an appointment with a cardiologist. This guy had a cabbage within a week.
Oh, my goodness.
He was seen. He had a stress test. Lucky we expedited things a bit for him. Failed his stress test miserably. Went to cath, had 3 vessels, severe disease, and had a cabbage. I went to see him post-op day 1. He was in the ICU. He was still completely lined up with everything, but they had him out of bed, sitting in a chair. He was extubated, and I walked in, and I said, Werner, how are you doing? And he smiled at me.
Oh, no.
And I thought, you've had a stroke.
Oh, no.
He had the tiniest little droop of the right side of his upper lip.
That probably no one
It was
ever would have.
so incredibly subtle that no one, and his wife didn't even notice it, but he said that wasn't surprising to him. But I didn't say anything to him right then.
Yeah.
Because but I went out, I found his cardiologist, and I said, I know Werner really well. I've lived beside of him for 20 years. I said, you need to get a CT of his brain. He's had a stroke. They had a neurologist come and see him first.
Yeah, of course.
He had a huge field deficit, peripheral field deficit. So, and when they saw that, then they agreed to do the CT scan. They weren't completely convinced that I had noticed the tiny little droop of his lip. And he had a shockingly large deficit. Really? It was huge. Most of it was in the frontal lobe, some in the temporal. It was shocking. He had multiple occipital lobe, multiple deficits.
Oh, man.
Probably showered some emboli with, And he, to this day, doesn't think he has any vision problems because he's, most people ignore the thing.
Yeah.
And other than his vision problems and this little droop, and interestingly enough, his wife particularly says, and I've noticed a bit of it myself even, that he has a personality change. She said he used to be, incredibly patient with her and whatever, and now he loses his temper in a shorter, I think he doesn't show that so much in public.
Yeah.
But I think that, as some of these studies have done just, routine CT scans and imaging and MRIs after, surgeries just for other reasons.
Yeah.
We've been seeing a lot of strokes.
Yeah.
And so now I think it's tuned people into this.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that there's a lot more strokes after surgery. And even low risk. There was that 2014, study out of, I think, the Netherlands, right? Some European country that showed that even with low-risk surgeries, the patients who had had strokes within 9 months of their previous, non-cardiac surgeries had elevated risks of strokes. And even TIAs, pre-op TIAs, which I want to really call out too, because, I think people say, it's just a TIA. And I'm like, that's like saying somebody just had a little angina.
Yeah.
Like, you want to wait till they have a myocardial infarction to say that they're at risk?
Yeah.
Like, in fact, maybe the people who have an angina are more at risk because they have myocardium at risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
They haven't already had their event and survived.
Yeah.
And so those people who had those TIAs.
Same. Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that, we just need to be really cognizant of, like protecting people's brains.
Yeah. So we have these patients, that are frail, that are much higher risk, that are really more apt to have post-op cognitive dysfunction. What are some of the ways that we as team anesthesists, particularly intra-op, can we take care of them? I know we've had discussion about like process EEG and things like that. So walk us through some of those things that we may be able to, really avoid harm later on.
I don't know that we have all the answers yet. But again, I think that we have some signals that are telling us that at least these should be warning signs. That we know that, hypotension intra-op is associated with major adverse cardiovascular events. Whether avoiding hypotension lowers those risks is still not
TBD.
Yes. But I said that shouldn't stop us from saying it's a marker. Right? Yeah. Like perhaps if you've got a patient who's hypotensive, now that patient shouldn't just go to the floor post-op. Mm-hmm. They shouldn't just be sent home sometimes after a surgery. They should be monitored in a different way. They should be educated about things like warning signs that can be very subtle. Because if we know it's associated, then why are we then at least saying, this is a warning, just like we know that having ischemic heart disease or coronary disease is associated with worse outcomes. Necessarily, revascularizing, particularly with stenting, preoperative doesn't necessarily lower your risk, but it doesn't stop us from anesthesiologists maybe saying, ooh, this patient may be slightly higher risk. I'm going to treat them slightly differently. And I think a lot of it is actually not just intra-op, but post-op. Mm-hmm. I like to say that, sometimes you're probably better off to go home after surgery where you perhaps got someone who cares about you, who can watch you a little more closely.
Well, and they'll pick up on that little facial, like the little nuance.
Then unfortunately go to a hospital setting where you're on a ward with a poor nurse who has 15 patients she's trying to see, who can barely get around the ward to administer the medications and do vitals once a shift. Who, the cleaning staff is turning off the pulse oximeter alarm because it's bothering them and they don't even know why.
Yeah, what it is. Yeah.
Which happened to me one time when I went up to see a patient. Oh, gosh. And it was alarming. And pretty soon the woman who was mopping the floor went over and pushed it and said that this patient had asked her to keep turning it off for him because it was bothering him.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. It was also waking them up whenever they...
Exactly.
And Desiree, we've already heard today from the ASA, haven't we, about this post-operative care issue.
We have, yeah.
In terms of that focus and that continuity from being in the operating room to post-operative care and the very issues that you're talking about, because You can be on a ward, you could be on the moon just about, because and as you say, perhaps ironically, sometimes at home the observations and attentions you'll get will be more. So a lot happening in this space, isn't there?
Yes, there is. So, even with the remote monitoring, right? We can even send patients with the monitoring, but I don't know if you've already had Guy discuss, but I was, lucky enough to hear you talk about some of the work that you had done already in Australia in this arena of the taking care of patients differently in the post-op.
I mean, it wasn't rocket science, but we saw signals of this. We knew that we weren't picking it up, and so we got people and put them and watched them closely. And my residents are driven mad because they have to see them on the clock, and there's a board to make sure they've ticked it off and so on. And it works, and it really does. And what's kind of interesting is that we've got good data saying it works, but it works for a long time. And we're seeing signals on improved recovery, less complications out for months, and quite possibly mortality out to a year and a half.
That's incredible.
So, what's going on mechanistically, as you say, what's actually happening?
Yeah.
Are there inflammatory mediators that are going on here? I mean, that's a really unanswered question. So, I think it's a really fertile area. And look, it's one we're familiar with, isn't it? I mean, that's our space. That's what we do. Just because the surgeon's no longer operating and we haven't got the gases flowing, they're the same issues kicking around. And I think we're terribly well placed to deal with that.
Yeah. It's interesting you said it, Beth, because, we have known for some time that just having a perioperative complication, right, even if you survive it, increases your risk for some time after that. So, one episode of post-op delirium should not just be viewed as, okay, done and over now.
Yeah.
The patient recovered from that.
They're fine,
We know that up to a year out that is a marker of, worse outcomes.
I think there's at least 3 big observational studies correlating quite closely that early postoperative complications and quite delayed mortality out to a year, 2, maybe even 3. So, I mean, it may be association. It might be you're more vulnerable to complications, more vulnerable to mortality downstream, or there is a causative effect there and there's a preventative possibility. And I'm kind of getting a sense it's the latter, that there is stuff that we can do. And of course, it's the frail ones that are and so identifying those is incredibly important. So in your institution and in your experience of what's happening around those, who's doing that sort of frailty assessment? And I guess who's funding that too? Is it recognised enough for people to kind of put the money out there to have it done, or is that something we need to work on?
Oh, we always get down to the almighty dollar, right?
It's not about the cost.
Especially in the United States, right? And, there's a couple things. So we do a frailty assessment on 100% of our patients 65 and over, or those that the provider who's seeing the patient deems worthy of that. And we educate them around these kinds of things, certain disease states, particularly decreased functional capacity in someone younger than that. And we use the frailty index, so we have lots and lots of data, and we are identifying. I want to also impress that I think that when we are evaluating these patients, we can do several other things too that can make a difference. It's a nutrition assessment. It's a cognitive, mini cog, baseline. Social supports. We know that social determinants of health are so important. And now, with I would say most centers in the United States having electronic records, it's a shame that we don't have better, sourcing of, registries to pull this. And I know Epic, I'm not, trying to plug into Epic, but I just have that in my institution. I've worked in the 3 previous institutions. They are developing some tools to help us get this data to better look at things like these outcomes for things.
And I think, and you were both in Dingle, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we heard from Danny Levitt that in fact the NHS is mandating by the early part of next year that there will be a formal risk assessment and kind of triaging process that has to happen all the time. I think I had that right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what's going to drive change, isn't it? If the recognition and the basic mandation and the rules around that to get this sort of change, is that going to help, do you think?
I think it will. I think a lot of actually preoperative medicine and medicine in the perioperative space outside of the immediate OR is being driven much more by countries outside of the United States than it is in the U.S. We're still very, particularly I think in the anesthesiology world, focused way too much on the intraoperative care of patients to the exclusion of everything else. We do have anesthesiologists practicing pain management and, ICU care. We are in charge of those patients in the PACU. But surgeons still really drive most postoperative care of patients, and hospitalists do. And I'm not, dinging hospitalists, but again, as somebody who trained in medicine, who I believe we were taught we could do pre-op medicine.
Yeah.
I believe sometimes it's misguided to think that hospitalists who haven't actually done specialized training in post-op surgical care really have the right skill set completely to manage these patients. And then I think a lot of the problem, at least in the U.S., is this failure with transitions of care.
Yeah.
We're very isolated and
siloed.
Right. So then nobody's talking to the next person. Nobody's having this, translate into the next handoff. Our primary care doctors are outside of the hospital acute care settings now. So they're not even managing their patients post-op. So then they will say that the patients come back to them and they have no idea what surgeries they had because,
Yeah.
and they don't even understand the terminology. We use acronyms, we use abbreviations, and we use these, sophisticated terms. And it's like, what is that surgery?
Yeah.
Like, what did they actually do to the patient? Did they take out an organ?
They don't. Patients don't know.
Right.
They don't know how to tell you what's
Right.
happened. Well, listen, we are wrapping it up.
Oh
They're
my
gonna
gosh.
close.
We
this
could have
thing
talked
on
here
it.
for a very long
I know.
time. I'm
we
just
could.
getting started.
I know. Well, listen, one of the questions that the ones I've been dying to ask you is we've had this conversation about what you do in pre-op and the assessments that you do and what kind of happens post-op. We, as a clinician that does anesthesia, I am focused on the intra-op piece. What are some of the recommendations that you give to take care of those frail patients? Like what do I need to do? I mean, advanced monitoring, different types of, technology and where to keep them, I guess I should say, on their vitals.
So I think probably a lot of listeners are in very different spaces here, right?
Yeah.
They're like, I do nothing. I know nothing about sort of how to start. So there was one article in the literature that was published in the surgical literature that I don't know how many people saw in anesthesiology that showed just simply identifying patients as frail when they did nothing else about it, decreased complications, costs, and lengths of stay. And you may say, but it's that Hawthorne effect, right? It's that labeling. We label patients with allergy bands. Okay, we still have to look in their medical record to see what they're allergic to, but we say, that big red band that says they're allergic to something. We label them as a fall risk.
Yeah.
And we know that these basic, simple things like that have made a difference. Putting something up on the patient's, room that says they're hard of hearing or they cannot see well or whatever, right? So I think just start by having an assessment. And, if you have an electronic record, it's generally already available to you, assessment tool that can pull information from your electronic record. Labeling patients as frail. Start to educate people that frail patients need cared for differently. Educating the patient and the family. Is this patient capable of going home and taking care of themselves? A lot of people now don't live close to their family members. They don't have family members to take care of them. We tell people they all have to have a ride home, but then we drop the ball. We just get them home.
Yeah.
We don't tell them what else to do.
Yeah.
So I think, basic things. If you don't have access to a frailty assessment tool, there's two quick and easy ways to sort of identify a group of frail patients. Any patient who's had 3 or more falls in the 6 months prior to surgery have a 100% risk of a complication in the perioperative period. Of course, falling is a marker of frailty and not doing well. Activities of daily living. There was a very good study out of the VA that looked at activities of daily living, those who were fully functional, those who were either fully dependent on someone else or even just partially dependent on someone else to take care of themselves, bathing, feeding, dressing themselves. These were community dwelling people, not SNF patients.
Yeah.
And they showed that those who were even just partially dependent on someone else had higher risk. It was like moving them in. They looked at the ASA physical status scoring, and it moved them into the higher ASA physical status score. So a 2 independent person was that 2 who was partially dependent was like a 3 independent person. So, I think just looking at some really basic assessments and then making sure that, you hopefully have some, geriatricians and primary care doctors who can help facilitate in those transitions of care back. And then trying to engage your patients in shared decision making about their goals of care, and your surgeons about really engaging these patients about goals of care, because many of them, it's not about how long they live. It's whether they can continue to live independently, whether they continue to drive if they're driving, if they're going to make it to their, great-granddaughter's graduation.
Yeah,
And-
that's what's important to them.
Yeah, and so many of them don't understand. We really don't spend time telling them how long it's going to take them to recover from this total joint. So even sometimes the timing of surgery is not ideal.
Yeah.
Because they think they're going to, be home in 2 weeks and back to
it'll be
doing
fine.
whatever.
Back to
Right,
business.
right. So, I could go on and on, but I think that, depends on where you're at.
Yeah.
But a lot of geriatricians are very interested in helping us in this space.
Yeah.
So try to find a geriatrician, try to find a champion surgeon who's, willing to work with you. And you can start small. Again, identifying patients, getting your nutritionists involved in these patients. Just simply giving a patient like 3 weeks of Ensure pre-op, who's nutritionally,
Deficient,
deficient.
malnourished.
Thank you. Has been shown to lower risk and complications. And some of these older patients live alone and they don't eat so well, right?
Yeah.
They don't taste as well. They don't have good teeth. They don't like to cook for themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of that. I don't like.
I know. I do. And it's the same, but too, like, as someone who's, giving the medications, monitoring all these things, like we have to make sure we're not, over medicating or giving medications that actually cause issues, right? Or, monitoring their brain.
If I do have a moment to say something else, and thank you. And I think you asked me this at the very beginning, and then you came back, especially speaking to the intra-op. I think this idea that, it's okay to give everybody a general anesthetic, or that we give sedation that is really a general anesthetic, but we call it sedation.
Yes.
Is very problematic. We do know that, using midazolam, for example, increases the risk of falls.
Yeah.
Not just whether it increases delirium or not, because I think it's still out to, debate whether one dose of midazolam increases the risk of post-op delirium. But one dose of midazolam has been shown to increase the risk of patients who fall and break a hip. Do they really need midazolam? A lot of these, patients are happy to sit and talk to you. They're lonely and a little TLC.
Yeah.
And I do think with brain monitoring, we should consider using it, because I think there's some evidence in the literature that if you don't keep these people at very deep levels of anesthesia, they have lower risks of post-op delirium and cognitive dysfunction, and even for sedation. Some of the studies that looked at sedation showed no difference with general anesthesia, but it's because those patients are essentially
Given general anesthesia.
given general anesthetic or a deep sedation. And do they really need that? They go to their dentist and they don't get sedated. They go and have these lengthy geriatrician evaluations.
Yeah.
And, I always think for cataract surgery, patients have told me that the evaluations our ophthalmologists do before they come for their cataract surgery is lengthier.
Way worse.
And more stressful.
Right.
And way worse than the cataract surgery.
Yeah, true. Barbara Jean, it is, so you hear everybody, we're live, so you're hearing us, they're kicking us out. We could talk for ages about all of this. It's so fascinating. I love hearing from you. You're so passionate about the topic, and that's what we need to keep pushing these messages for us to understand what we need to do to take care of this very special patient population. So,
especially as Guy and I are getting closer to that. We need you, Desiree. We need you.
Okay.
In Australia, you know what the definition of old age is?
No.
Someone 5 years older than your boss. So, it's a moving field.
It's a moving target.
It's going to stay above me for a while, I think.
I like
There
it.
you go. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming back here on Top Men Talk. It's always such a pleasure. And Guy, thank you for sitting in this weekend
Been
with
quite
us.
wonderful.
It's been so much
It's been
fun.
an absolute
Yeah.
honor, actually.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for hanging with us here at Anesthesiology 2023. We can't tell you how much we appreciate you. You keep us going. Listeners all over the world, keep us doing this because it is a lot of fun, but it's wonderful to know that we can share all these wonderful conversations with you wherever you are. So thank you, thank you. And again, thank you so much to our sponsors, G Healthcare, Edwards Life Sciences, Medtronic. We can't do it without you, so thank you so much for that. Everyone have a great day, and we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, everybody.
Bye, everyone.